All right. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So you can share. Can you see my screen? Yes. All right. All right. Thank you. Yeah. Right. So this is a forest in Kaziranga actually. So the topic today was the language of trees. Now, why language of trees? Do you think that trees speak? Do you think that trees have a language? This is what we are going to talk about today. Now, a few years ago, if someone had told me that trees talk to each other, they share their food with their young ones, and they warn their neighbors and others of danger and are connected by a vast network, all right? I would have probably smiled politely and assumed that they are being poetic, wouldn't you? Do you think that, can you hear them speak? Can you hear trees, plants speak? All right. So, but after all, these trees just stand there, isn't it? Can you see here? They are just standing there. Their trees ruffle sometimes with wind, but they are making their food, we know, with light and air and water. They are making their food. They are supplying oxygen to us, and that's all they do. They don't move. They don't talk to each other, and they don't make any sounds that we can hear, except for the leaves or the tree. The stem sometimes moving with the wind. That's all that we can hear. We can't hear them talking or making any other sound, right? They don't seem to be doing too much anyway. But then I came across the work of this lady, Suzanne Simard, and there's another German, she is a Canadian scientist, and there is a German forester by the name of Peter Wohlleben. And I realized that the forest is actually far more strange, far more fascinating than most of us actually ever imagined. The story begins in the forests of British Columbia, Canada. Young Suzanne grew up in a family of loggers. That means her family was into the professional business of timber production, right? Now, forests were part of everyday life. She loved the woods, she loved the forests. Those tall cedar, fir, birch trees seemed to be talking to her. She loved spending her time just, sitting near the trees and watching the days go by. Now, she also watched as vast sections of the forest were being clear cut. And she felt sad that these mighty trees were just being reduced to logs, dead and, just straight. Like most foresters of the time, people believed that forests were simply collections of individual trees. They compete with each other, and people compete with each other for sunlight, air, and nutrients. So it's just that when we are taking the timber from a forest, we are making use of the forest, which is that's what the purpose is of a forest. That's what most foresters believe, and of course, most of us also believed that we also believe that the strongest of the trees survived the disease, the winds, the nature's destructive forces, and the weakest died. All right. The nature was itself a competition. But Suzanne wasn't entirely convinced about that. She she became very much interested, and she pursued a work in a field of science based on forestry and microbiology. As a budding scientist, she began asking questions that many others were not answering, were not even asking, of course, and they were not getting the answers to. Why were some of the young trees surviving in places where they shouldn't? Why did these forests seem to recover after heavy disturbances in ways that were that were really difficult to explain? And what was happening underground? We can see a tree standing, and we can sometimes see the roots below the tree trunk, but we don't know what is happening inside the ground underneath. And as she looked deeper, she found many surprising answers. Beneath every forest floor lies an enormous network of fungi. I'm sure every one of you have heard fungi. There are these mushrooms, which are also a type of fungi. Okay, these are neither animals nor plants. All right, they have a separate class of their own, and these fungi actually grow as tiny threads through the soil, okay, and connect themselves to tree roots. So these fungi, which are individual, like they are separate organisms, they penetrate the soil and they latch on to the roots system of the trees, and they form connections with those roots. And these roots are called mycorrhiza, all right? And these fungi help plants to absorb more water and nutrients from the soil. At first, researchers actually thought that the fungi simply helped individual trees absorb nutrients. This was a known fact for later scientists. But then Suzanne found some more baffling facts. It was something much bigger. These fungal networks were linking trees together. They were forming real societies of these trees, not just one or two trees or not just one or two species, but entire forests. The entire forests were connected underground by this huge network of fungi. A towering old fir tree could be connected to dozens, sometimes hundreds of younger trees around it. So, I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine this? This is the cell of a root of one of the trees, and can you see the arrow marks? And they are pointing towards the thread-like structures there. Okay. And these are nothing but the fungal threads. They are called hyphae in scientific language, sorry. And these are the very threads which get associated with these roots, okay? And they capture the nutrients. And she started calling this huge network or internet of the mycorrhiza as wood wide web. All right, this is called a wood wide web. And suddenly the idea of the forest changed. Instead of seeing trees as isolated individuals competing against each other, these scientists began to see actually the network of relationships. And at the center of many of these networks stood the oldest and largest of trees. You can see in this slide the huge tree. Okay, this is a very old tree. You have seen in a forest that there will be a lot of younger, narrower trunked trees, and then there will be though these trees, which will be really old, very, very huge trunks, and they will be, they will be like the grandmother or the mother standing there, looking like very, very experienced and towering individuals. She called these mother trees. All right, mother trees. And these are not just, this is not just Suzanne's experience or, observation. Lot of indigenous people in Canada, in Australia, in India even, we believe the wisdom of these mother trees. Okay, we believe that these trees are connected to each other and to us. We are rather connected to these trees, and we and the trees are there to protect us, and we have a very, very intimate, very close bond with them. Now, when these when these giants actually weren't actually this only simply bigger than many other trees, they appeared to be connected to more trees than anyone had expected. They acted like hubs in the network. When young seedlings, this is what Suzanne found out with all her experiments, that when there was disturbance around, the seedlings, they struggle to grow in deep shade, isn't it? When the forest is very, very dense, young seedlings really struggle for sunlight and for water. So these trees, these mature trees, sometimes provide resources towards these younger seedlings to grow. And when the disturbance occurred, like, there is a like there is insect attack, or there is some kind of disturbance, there is, weather change or something, these very old trees seemed to help maintain the stability in the forest. They provide their nutrients, their carbon and their other nutrients to these more younger trees, more fragile trees. And the more Suzanne learned, the more she began to think that forests functioned less as battlefields and more as communities. Now, things like communities, connections, societies, these are all human constructs. And she was, criticized for using these terms, saying, and the people who criticized her was saying that you are anthropomorphizing or making the comparison of these trees with human beings, which is not scientifically correct. Now, there might be, there might be truth in this argument, but this, the fact remains that the mycorrhiza did more than just protect these trees and give nutrients. And we will see this later on as well. And that trees are not really just resources, all right? Now, Suzanne still went on to say that, and she faced a lot of criticism because she was a woman scientist and, experimenting on these unconventional topics. And still she went on saying that cooperation matters as much as competition. There was a lot of competition in these forests, but there was a lot of cooperation even. So that made that forests healthy, and that created a lot of diversity, and that in turn created the resilience for the forests to survive. And humanity, we humans must go beyond our, narrow vision, tunnel vision, and start thinking of the relationship which we have with nature as a form of participation and not as a way of control. All right. Next is this person, where this person is named Peter Wohlleben, and he is a German forester with a lot of experience, and he wrote this book named The Hidden Life of Trees. When actually I read this book first before I read Suzanne's book, and I was baffled with the description that he gave. It was, of course, his book and his knowledge is based on Suzanne's findings, but he took a step further. He said that after spending decades working in forests and huge gardens, Wohlleben actually became convinced that the trees were much more social than people realized. All right. He said that there are scientific studies and, of course, his own observations, which tell him that forests are actually telling stories. He wrote about old stumps, like, old these trees which were cut off and the stump remained. These stumps that remained alive for very long. We have also seen these tree stumps remaining alive. They don't die as soon as the tree is cut off, isn't it? And why is that possible? Because the neighboring trees are still supplying the nutrients, much needed nutrients and water through their root system to this stump. And he talked about forests as communities where cooperation mattered as much as competition. And for the first time, millions of readers of this book were really captivated. The way the way he made the scientific jargon into very, very common language. And of course, he also anthropomorphized trees for us to really understand. Okay. Now, many of these books, which are written for common general people, um, if they are written in a very scientific language, people don't find that interest. All right. But once you tell it like a story, people find it more appealing. Okay. More connection they have, because people, human beings, us, we are really connected with our heart, isn't it? So that's what he wrote. That's how he wrote. He wrote that when he wrote, and people started looking at forests differently, not as timber, not as just scenery, but as living societies. As scientists, read about this Suzanne's work and Peter Wohleben's work, they were divided. They said that, okay, there might be truth in the the fungal network, the mycorrhizal network, but they really criticized Wohleben's language. They said that this is not based on facts. When he described trees as having feelings, they had friendships, they had families, emotions, or even love. Critics actually argued that he was crossing the line between science and metaphor. The problem wasn't the science that was entirely wrong. We still don't know whether this knowledge actually applies to trees, all right? What we do know is already remarkable enough. We know that trees communicate using chemical signals, and they are connected with fungal networks. That much is proven. There is no scientific, two ways on that. They respond to threats even. But then trees influencing one another like friends, they have feelings, they feel stressed, and they have a language, is what was problematic for the scientists. But again, in 2023, as latest as 2023, there was a paper which said that plants emit emit some sounds. And which type of plants emit these sounds? These are stressed plants. Stressed with there may be some disease onset, or there may be water scarcity in the root in the soil, and this creates stress in the plant's environment. And a thirsty plant sounds different sounds different from an injured plant. Suppose the plant is injured, or the branch is cut off, or there is a fungal attack or something. These sounds differ from the sounds which are coming from dehydrated plants. And I mean, this was really something big, isn't it? Now, these scientists actually kept some ultrasonic detecting instruments near the plants, about 40 meters away from the plants, and they detected about 20 to 40 hertz of sound, all right? And that is much, much beyond human hearing capacity. And they differed with different types of stress. And of course, there are a lot of answers, there are a lot of questions which still remain, but then we are coming closer to what Suzanne and Peter Wohlleben have been talking to us all these years. That trees have a language which we may not be able to hear or understand, but they do send out messages. They do connect with each other. And this knowledge is very crucial for our ecosystem, for our earth, for our agricultural outputs. If we can really tap on this knowledge, we will be really, before the plants actually die or are, severely stressed. Once they start giving out these sounds, we can tend to them faster before the situation goes out of hand. So can you imagine the gravity of the situation, the real importance of these findings? So forests, that means, are much more complicated than we actually know or perceive. There are competition, of course, but there is connection as well. Relationships also exist. And resilience comes from difficult years of growing and connecting. And just as forests survive because of countless invisible connections, human lives are sustained by relationships that we often take for granted. And this is what actually, what we can take away from this discussion is that nothing survives in isolation. We cannot survive just within ourselves and with our work, with our close, network of people. There is so many connections that we still are unaware of. And the greatest lesson we can take from these forests may not be about the fungi or the carbon or the mother trees. It is simply that whether we are trees or people, we are shaped by connections that surround us. It's the whole earth that talks to us in different languages. And perhaps the forest has been trying to teach us that all along.